When we think of revolutions, we envision passionate cries for justice, streets filled with protesters, and the eventual overthrow of the oppressive regime. The tyrant falls, the crowds cheer, and then what? The morning after a revolution always seems to lead to bloody civil war and dispute. But why? That is the question I want to try and answer today. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. Just before we get started, if you want to help me make more content and read some pretty good fantasy books, check out my books linked below. I've received some solid reviews, especially on Worldbuilding, which is a good thing given I run this channel. So you might even see where I implement some of my own advice in my books. Right, enough of that. Let's talk about the aftermath of revolution, starting with factions. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an odd question here. Why do most revolutions fail? That one is actually easy to answer. The authority that the revolution is aimed at holds all the cards. They have the army, they have the government, they make the laws. And that last point is important. It's why taxation is legal and theft is not, why execution is legal and murder is not, and so on. When the authority does it, it's legal and considered just. When the revolution does it, it's criminal and they'll hunt you down. And the authority has the big stick to make that true, and most people support the authority, especially if their lives are kind of okay. Not great, just not too bad. So, for the authority to lose takes a lot. Generally, it requires the authority itself to lose the will to fight because they lose the trust of those factions that actively prop the authority up. And the only way to get that to happen is for enough people to believe they'd be better off without the authority than with it. So, for the revolution to have any chance, it needs to form a broad church alliance that gives home to all of these people who believe that they'd be better off without the authority. And that's why successful revolutions are rarely monolithic. They're a mosaic of varied factions coming together under a shared ideal. An ideal often general enough to mean different things to different people. A classic example is the French Revolution and their rallying cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These sound like fine things, but they are very broadly defined. So broad that it can mean different things to different people. Liberty for a noble might mean release from the oath the king holds him to. Liberty for an urban worker probably means something else entirely. And that, of course, creates the post-revolution tension. Clearly, these factions that make up the revolutionary cadres under the umbrella of the unifying ideal are the key to understanding why revolutions so often end up in bloodshed. So, let's plunge a little deeper into these factions. I am going to borrow some terms from Mike Duncan's excellent podcast on revolutions, which I highly recommend to anyone who has an interest in revolutionary history. Go listen to Mike Duncan's podcast. Okay. At a high level, we can categorize the revolutionaries into the salon revolutionaries, who are the thinkers, the writers, the financiers. Generally, these are educated and they are part of the elite classes. And then we have the street revolutionaries. These are the actual muscle, the protesters, the barricade builders, the mob. If we zoom in a little further, there is even more detail. We can split the salon revolutionaries into the conservative revolutionaries, those who want just a smidgen of change, just enough to keep things stable. They're members of the current ruling class, and they would have taken any hint of reform from the previous regime. They don't really want to revolt. No. They're here because they see no other choice. If you haven't watched my first video on revolutions, which was Revolution versus Reform, check that out in the information card. And you will see all of the potential off-ramps available to a regime before a revolution actually breaks out. Anyway, back to the Salon revolutionaries. The elite liberals are the moral compass. They genuinely wish for a more egalitarian society or whatever the goals of the revolution is. However, they are still part of the elite class pre-revolution. But they do want change to come. They are itching for deep social reform. But they are not the educated radicals. Now, the educated radicals envision a world remade from its roots. And these guys often bridge the gap between the salon and the street. They have deep ties to street revolutionaries. But they don't come from the street. They generally come from the more elite classes. Speaking of the street side, over here we also have different factions. Mostly we can split them into city workers who are aiming for affordable daily bread and fair pay. Generally, these guys are socially liberal and want society reforms as well as changes in the government. And then we have farmers and peasants who want better prices for their produce and a peaceful life on their land. Generally, these guys are socially conservative and they definitely just want to be left alone to live their lives. Given this diverse tapestry, it is not hard to see where this story is going, right? And indeed, that's why even the rare successful revolutions mostly end up with second wave revolutions, civil war, and other terrible things. And just as a reminder, revolutions are very, very, very rarely successful. Mostly, the authority stamps the revolution into a mud puddle. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this look at factions, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about the cracks that form in the revolutionary umbrella. So in the broad categories we've painted, the street with its fiery spirit wants to reinvent society. The salon, on the other hand, often leads towards moderation and a return to some semblance of normalcy. However, even in these broad sways, there is nuance. So let's take a look at what our revolutionary factions actually want. Salon conservatives believe that the revolution has done its job once the tyrant is overthrown. Minimal changes are ideal, and they vehemently oppose social reforms. They want a simple return to order with only the absolute minimum reforms that will provide a sop to the mob. The Salon elite liberals, on the other hand, advocate for a structured political path to reform. Think of people like the Marquis de Lafayette during the French Revolution, who supported the revolution, but also emphasized restoring order after the first, overthrow of the king. These guys believe that social reform is required, but they don't want to seek the continued violence. They do, after all, have a lot to lose if the mob turns on them, so they want an ordered, structured, patient approach to social reform. And lastly, for the Salon, we have the educated radicals. Their thirst for revolution does not end with the first wave. They see potential in aligning with the street, aiming for comprehensive societal upheaval. They often want to ride the revolution to power. However, they don't want the mob to be in the streets as an undirected force. They want it to be controlled, preferably under their control. So people should go home and wait for them to give the signal once more to take to the streets. And that's kind of what the Salon's looking for post-revolution. But how about the street side of the equation? The mob often feels sidelined once the immediate revolutionary goal is achieved. Not only do they feel sidelined, but the revolution inevitably betrays the street. Why? Well, because the people are not a monolith. Even if your Salon revolutionaries truly, honestly want to help the people, The people have diverse needs, and it makes it impossible to satisfy all of their demands. Just think of our very simplistic urban worker versus peasant farmer. The one wants to sell his bread for more money, the other wants cheap bread. And this is a very simplified example of the competing demands of the people who make up this street level revolutionary. And when the people realize that their aspirations are being ignored, and this might take a while, but when they do realize it, the second wave of revolution, often more violent, follows. Historical examples pretty much bear me out on this. Following the monarchy's downfall in the French Revolution, internal power struggles between the Jacobins, the Girondins, and other factions spiraled into the Reign of Terror. During this time, at least 17,000 people were officially executed by the revolutionaries after the Jacobins took over. And that's just the executions. It's not counting people who died in the Civil War or in the prisons being held pre-trial. Around 300,000 people were arrested. And it's simply because it is such a split, diverse group of people who make up the revolutionary cadres that after the thing that they have united against is overthrown, those cracks widen to the point where no amount of patching will bring them back together. It's kind of inevitable, given what you have to do in order to overthrow the authority, that after you've overthrown the authority, the alliance is split apart. But while we've dived pretty deep into the internal strife between the salon and the street, we can't forget the looming shadows of external powers and neighboring countries. These entities often watch revolutions closely, gauging opportunities or threats to their own interest. Just as a wound attracts predators in the wild, the fractures of a post-revolution society can beckon ambitious neighbors or rival nations. These nations or rivals might support a particular faction. For instance, an external power might financially or militarily back the Salon conservatives if they promise trade advantages or political alliances. Or a neighboring country might see benefit in prolonging the chaos, preventing the newly formed state from becoming a potential threat by keeping all the revolutionaries at each other's throat. Or you could even have direct intervention, where you can have invasions or annexation, especially if the revolutionary state has the resources of strategic value. Of course, an external state could also be a place where the elites go to, flee to. And this can result in those elites then fomenting a counter-revolution from the neighboring country. Historically, external powers do sway the post-revolutionary world. So in your fantasy world, consider the geopolitical landscape around the nation that has been in this revolution. What are these countries and what are their goals? In essence, it is important to remember that revolutions are not endpoints. They are volatile chapters in the ever-evolving story of a nation. I think it is pretty much impossible for a revolution to be both successful and not suffer this kind of fracturing in factions that leads to a second wave and often more violent revolution. But maybe I'm wrong. Hit me up in the comments with how you see a revolution potentially unfolding in peace. And those are my thoughts on post-revolution fracturing in fantasy worlds. If you want to say thanks for this video, super thanks is enabled, or you could become a channel member and get early access to my videos. If you enjoyed this video, please do check out my video on palace coups. It really does help the algorithm love me if you do click on those recommended videos, and I will see you soon for another video. Go on, click on that palace coup video. My cat is making you do it. Clicky, clicky the video.